Well, yeah, we'll go ahead and get started recording. We might see a couple more people joining us as we had a number of good registration
Great.
for today's event. So, but before we get started, if you haven't already filled out this poll, please go ahead and give us an answer. It kind of is interesting and useful information for us as we take stock of, how familiar you are all with this topic. I'll give it just one more minute because we have 11 out of 17 people who are in the call right now that have answered. So that's pretty good. All right. Um, I'm gonna go ahead and get us started. It's 12:03. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Maria Doherty from Housing Forward Virginia, and I'm so glad you're here today. I think results of the poll have shown that most people are pretty unfamiliar with today's topic. So maybe they've heard of it to some extent, but they don't know a lot of the details or they're completely new to it. I definitely would be interested to hear from the people who've discussed it but haven't moved forward to hear, why that might be the case. Um, I can share the results later, but that's what I'm seeing on my end. Today's webinar is a part of our Zoned Out series. It's a statewide outreach and education campaign that we launched to help community leaders better understand zoning and its impact on housing in Virginia. Zoned Out really grew out of the completion of the Virginia Zoning Atlas, which is a first of its kind tool that maps and visualizes zoning codes related to housing across every locality in the Commonwealth. For the first time, we can see in one place how land use decisions are shaping housing supply and affordability from the Northern Neck to Northern Virginia and beyond. Our goal with Zoned Out is pretty straightforward. We just want to break down a pretty complex topic that is zoning, connect it to what matters most to your communities, and then give you practical tools to act. So today's session is just one part of that larger effort. Today, we're going to be talking about permit-ready housing programs, an approach that can dramatically cut the time, cost, and uncertainty of building quality homes. It's one of the most practical tools available to localities interested in moving the needle on housing production, and it connects directly to the kinds of zoning reforms that the Zoning Atlas is helping us to identify in Virginia. We have two excellent guests with us today, and they're going to bring very different and complementary perspectives to this conversation. So I'm going to introduce them both now. Matthew Petty, who's joined us today, is the co-founder and CEO of Pattern Zones Co. He's been working with municipalities across Middle America to design and implement permit-ready housing programs, pre-approved designs that allow homes to be built without lengthy review processes. Matthew is a genuine pioneer in this space, and we're really grateful to have him here with us today. We're also joined by Kellie Brown from the city of Charlottesville, who brings an invaluable local government perspective on what it actually takes to get these kinds of programs off the ground. Kellie can speak to maybe some of the administrative and political realities that national experts might see from the outside, but practitioners live every day, right? And with that, Matthew, I'm going to hand it over to you. We have about 30 minutes, so we'd love for you to walk us through what permit-ready housing programs are, what you've seen work on the ground, and what localities might need to think about from a zoning standpoint before they get started. So take it away.
Awesome. And thank you for that generous introduction. I appreciate that. It's a pleasure to be here. My name's Matthew. I live and work in Fayetteville, Arkansas. I was a council member out here for almost 13 years. Along the way, I decided to try and help cities and towns with housing challenges. We did our first pre-approved building program in 2016, and for about the past 5 years or so, it's what I focus on full time. We're big believers in pre-approved building programs. If you maybe you won't remember anything about today except for, man, that guy was really excited about permitting. That's what we're here to talk about, how we can make it better. And the reason we focus on permitting and the reason we focus on pre-approved building programs specifically, look, we'll get right to it. Housing challenges are awful. They're wicked. There are so many of them. They all stack together, and cities and towns can't really do a whole lot about many of them. Cities and towns don't have any control over interest rates, the cost of labor or the cost of sticks and bricks that go into building and into the sticker price housing after it's constructed. But one thing they do have a lot of control over is permitting. And there's a lot to be done with permitting. We can make a big difference. We can make real savings in time, real savings in money. But if you're here and you're thinking pre-approved building programs are a silver bullet for housing affordability, you're wrong. They're really a good component for a broader affordability strategy. It's something that can make a big difference, especially with infill permits and getting the kinds of housing that we want. Making it easier for people to build housing where we need it most is something that can help with affordability uh, quite a bit, especially as we increase supply. But one of the most interesting things to me is the way pre-approved building programs can help people who live in your community actually participate, actually execute some of those development projects on their own. So we're going to talk up front, we're going to talk a little bit about where we're at with pre-approved building programs nationwide. Are they still an experiment, or have we kind of moved out of the experimental phase or not? That's what we'll start by talking about that. Then we'll talk a little bit about the theory, about why we think they can be so impactful. And then finally, we'll just talk about some practical stuff and some case studies before we turn it over to Kelly. So first, I want to start with this. This is called an adoption curve. And researchers try to study the adoption curve of all different kinds of technology, going way back, even, roads, but radio, TV, all of our social media, any kind of technology that's out there, cars, whatever it is, it all seems to follow this kind of this adoption curve. And the study of this is what we might think of as an adoption science. And people who study this, who try to draw these adoption curves, they usually divide the population up into these groups. And each one of these groups has a different appetite for risk. So pre-approved building programs aren't totally new anymore. We started on our first one 10 years ago. There are not hundreds, but there are now dozens of pre-approved building programs across the country. And almost every city and town that is earnestly engaged in a new comp plan or downtown master plan or anything like that is usually having a conversation now about pre-approved building programs in some way. So we've left the innovator phase. We're entering into the period where early adopters might get really excited. And the reason we talk about it like this is because, look, when I was on city council and as I've worked with communities in different states and all different sizes, one of the things I've seen is that every group in City Hall has a different level of willingness to be the first. And the people who are willing to be the first, they already have pre-approved building programs now. If you work in a community, if you work for an administration that doesn't necessarily want to be the very first, but is eager to jump on a good idea when they see it, this is your time. This is your time to start thinking about how you can really get a pre-approved building program implemented and off the ground. If you work for a community that needs to be certain that it's a sure thing, and every single detail of the plan and how it's going to work needs to be set and studied and proven before you get started, then you might not be ready. You might be in the phase that is for the early majority or even the late majority, if that's the way you treat implementation and new ideas in your community. And there's no right or wrong here, but think as we talk about this, what it would actually be like, who would be involved in the work group, what kind of budgets, how would you arrange the budgets to be able to do something like that? Where would you fit it into your work plan? And start to imagine what kind of a profile you might fit in your community and when implementing a pre-approved building program is right for you. Let's talk about what it actually does. This is a diagram. This is just illustrative of typical American blocks. Most of our built fabric follows roughly this format. This is very suburban. By the numbers, this is about 3 dwelling units per acre. And we often think, many people in our communities, many people we work with, even me myself thought for a long time that the only way to really see housing challenges answered would be to rezone everything and change a lot of things block by block. But as we really try to study and observe neighborhoods and how they change over time, what we see is that most often, most neighborhoods, very hot markets are different, but most neighborhoods change a little bit more slowly than that. And we show these four diagrams in a row. By the way, the density in this final diagram is 18 units per acre, 6 times the original number of houses in the first stage. You can imagine that each one of these takes 5 to 10 years in a typical neighborhood. And although this is just a diagram, we think it's compelling because we can go from 3 units per acre to 18 units per acre to a neighborhood format that supports local commercial activity, that returns tax revenues, that can actually pay for infrastructure improvements and infrastructure maintenance. And this is a little contrived, but if I just go back and then forward again, you may notice that none of the housing in the original diagram is torn down in order to achieve this. And this is what we might think of kind of the ideal of incremental development over time, of small scale development projects. And it really is possible to add housing into neighborhoods in this way. And we think that even the people who lived here the whole time would still recognize their neighborhood as familiar whenever this incremental development scenario plays out. And that familiarity principle is super important, right? That is what anchors people to their sense of identity, to their communities and their neighborhoods over time. And it's something that pre-approved building programs are really well suited to sustain. Okay, this is a common refrain. Every time we show this, especially in a small private group where there's a lot of trust built up and people are invited and free to share their objections, somebody always says, well, all this small scale development is well and good, and accessory dwelling units sound cool and so on and so forth, but we'd be seeing people who wanted to build those if people actually wanted to build them, if people actually wanted them. And, this is the kind of thing that really gets me going. It's really hard to predict what people want if all we do is look at what's happening under the existing system. And we might just try to reframe this and turn this into a useful question. Why do houses, or why do big apartments, this question says houses, why do houses get built when other building types are really encouraged? And we want to turn that phrase, but no one wants to build those, into a question like this and all the conversations we have where we hear it, because this is actually something we can answer. This is actually something that can be useful to us. If we have good answers to this, then maybe we can think about what kind of reforms we should prioritize and where we should put our resources. We can think about what kind of programs, such as a pre-approved building program, might be useful to us. Well, here's our answer to this at a very high level. And this is based on our observations. I'll tell you, in Fayetteville, we did a lot of zoning reforms while I was on the council. We were really proud of it. We had our first form-based code in 2004. It wasn't very good. It was good for the day, but it was an early form-based code, and we didn't understand all of the different ways that form-based codes in general could be better. It was best in class at its time, but also over time, we were forced to admit that it wasn't producing the kind of development that we had really, really hoped for. We did a lot of revisions to that code too, and we did other supplemental codes. We have a great code for accessory dwelling units. We'll actually let anybody build 2 of them on their property, and that's by right. We have similar kinds of codes that are supposed to encourage fourplexes and other missing middle development. But over time, that kind of stuff just really wasn't happening at the scale that we had hoped for and expected. We had changed what was allowable, and we knew this stuff was marketable because we could do the math and people were saying they want it. But our theory that all we had to do is change the law and make the law better turned out to be wrong. And this is a hard lesson for me to take as a council member and even as a planner over the course of my career. I just really had this theory whenever I got started that the laws were the one thing that was wrong. And if we changed the laws, everybody would show up. Kind of a, if you build it, they will come theory. If you reform the law, then the right building plans will show up. The right kind of housing will show up in the city. What we have reckoned with is that there's this other dimension beyond what is marketable, beyond what people will pay for, beyond what the law allows somebody to build. Everyone who wants to build something, whether they are a professional outfit with a crew, or whether they're just somebody who wants to do one project that they've been dreaming about for a while, they still think more about what is convenient and what is inconvenient. Now, call me crazy, but I think even in this day and age, people are smart enough to tell for themselves when something's a waste of their time. And so if a process to get a permit approved is opaque, if they can't be assured that it's going to be worth their time, that they're going to get that permit at the end, that they're going to be able to build the building that they've been thinking about, they either don't do a project at all or they do a different kind of project that's easier. In Fayetteville, they were using what we call the lot split loophole. A lot of communities have a similar loophole. It just says if the project is small enough and if it's administrative enough, then you don't have to do a bunch of the other things. So our lot split loophole said as long as you could do an administrative lot split and you were only building duplexes or less, then you didn't have to do stormwater engineering or tree preservation or some other site review stuff. And I'm not saying the policy is right or wrong. What I'm saying is that because those lot split loophole projects were more convenient because they were an easy button, that's what everybody did. Whether they wanted to be a pioneering developer or not, whether they wanted to do a real cool project, or they just wanted to do something that had a positive bottom line, they always did the most convenient project around because it was faster and they knew that they could get a permit at the end without really fighting about it. So that had to change. Let's jump into some case studies. This is a pattern book that we did for Ohio. This was published back in March. This was meant to be a resource for cities and towns to launch their own pre-approved building program. And this is why we show this. So this also has some instructions, some best practices for how to make small scale development convenient. Housing Forward Virginia has already got great coursework underway and planned for the rest of the year that talks about zoning code reform, that talks about how to support small infill projects and what you have to do. And there's a short course for that. There's a short reference for that in this book. And what we did is we paired zoning reform best practices, a catalog of plans that are free to use all over Ohio, and a guide for implementing pre-approved building programs on your own without a consultant. So if this is something you're thinking about, look, I'm a consultant. We have some great colleagues that do this kind of work as well. We'd love for you to hire any one of us, but you can do it on your own. And there's a guide right here that's available for you. And I want to show you one thing about this. You can go to this website, housingohio.org. But one of the remarkable things that our client did, the Greater Ohio Policy Center with the Ohio Realtors, is they formed a community of practice after this book was published. Their goal with the book was to get state level support and to help communities launch these programs on their own. And so every community that was interested in operating a program after this book came out and using the plans for their program formed a cohort. They meet at least once a quarter. They have more frequent office hours, and they just share what they're learning with one another as they implement it. For example, there are some smaller towns on this list. One town took the lead to do a building review of their plans, and they're just sharing their red lines with the other communities to save everybody a little bit of time. There are a couple operational programs on the map, Zanesville, but this needs to be updated. Lima just launched a program with these plans on Monday. So this is a model that really works, having the plans available and then working together to launch your own programs. Just real quick, right? We don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but I just want to underscore, if you're going to do a pre-approved building program, companion reforms make a big difference. And we really don't want to belabor this point, but just imagine that you have some suburban zoning rules and you don't have rules that are tailored, that are actually calibrated to small infill properties. These are the same setbacks applied to a larger suburban, typical suburban format property and a smaller typical historic plat. And they're the same setbacks, and the buildable area is just so far reduced that you might even look at the property on the right that's smaller. And if you're applying these suburban standards to it, you might think of that as administrative contamination. You know, it's almost like a brownfield. It's unbuildable. It's practically unbuildable, and only, but in this case, only because of the rules that you have on board. So these kind of reforms don't have to be complicated. You can do small ones one at a time. You don't have to do a big omnibus revision or a whole new unified development code, but you do need to pay attention. You do need to calibrate these things if you really want to make a pre-approved building program work really well. And let's talk about what that means. This whole idea is kind of radical, or at least it was 10 years ago. The idea that you could start with a site and swipe left or swipe right on a menu of building plans and then actually have the plans in your hands, go get a permit, take the plans to the bank, take the plans to a contractor. 10 years ago, this was radical. And maybe for some communities, this still seems like something that is a big leap of faith. But this isn't exactly a new idea. In fact, we've been at it for quite a long time. It's really common. Maybe some of your communities are already doing this. Maybe some of your building officials already do what we call approval by affidavit, where a subdivision developer comes in, they have a set of plans that they want to build. There's one building review, and then the builder swears that when they construct the building the second or the third or the 30th time, they're going to build it the same way. And your building official may say, okay, that's fine. We won't do another full review. We'll just double check the field inspections. So that's really common. We might think of that as pattern books for subdivisions. So when we're talking about pre-approved building programs, we're really just talking about taking these same ideas of pattern books, an approval by affidavit, and trying to apply it on a citywide scale across the entire jurisdiction with all the different owners and the different parcel sizes that go along with it. But at its core, it's just a simple idea of, hey, maybe there are parts of this that we could get by with only reviewing once. By the way, you might be asking, like, what's this term pattern zoning? So we named our company after this term. We came up with the term first. We think that pre-approved building programs, they can be used a lot of different ways. But if you're going to be really intentional about how you use a pre-approved building program, we refer to that as pattern zoning. And to us, this is kind of like if you call a new form-based code, if you just refer to that simply as zoning, it's technically correct, but it just loses a lot of the nuance and a lot of the intention in that. And that's how we think of the difference between pattern zoning, or the relationship between pattern zoning and pre-approved building programs. By the way, it may seem like zoning and building codes were invented like way back in ancient Greece or in ancient history, even though they're only like 100 and 110 years old or so in the United States. But there's this interesting lesson. If you go back to that period of time, it's not like communities weren't being built. We still had main streets, we still had market squares, we still had residential districts, but there weren't building codes and there weren't really zoning codes. And the way it worked was people literally looked at something that they liked, that they thought would make a difference if they did it again, and they just did it again with a couple of revisions and modifications according to their own tastes and their own ambitions. That's the idea that we hope to bring back with pre-approved building programs. We could do that again. We could give people that opportunity, even though we do have modern codes and we do have modern contemporary standards for life and safety in our buildings. Okay, here's how it could work. We'll do a quick demo here. This is a live program in Overland Park. Everybody whisper a prayer to the information technology and the internet gods. We're going to try and do this live. A pre-approved building program, in its concept, should be super simple. You've got the property, you can look up the plans, you can download the plans, and then you can go file the permit. And it could actually be that easy, and that's what we'll do here. So in Overland Park, Kansas, this is a city of about 200,000 people, but it could work the same way, whether you have 20,000 people or 10,000 people or even more than 200,000, even in large cities. We're just going to pick a property at random. Let's look for one with good infill potential. Okay, let's do one. This one looks like a big property here. When I have a property, it doesn't matter what community I am, I can see what kind of buildings are actually pre-approved for that property. And I'll just pick one. And right away, we can be able to download this. Now, of course, this is a little bit silly for me to try and do this to mimic all the decisions that somebody who wants to do a project might make in just a quick 30-second kind of a walkthrough. In reality, somebody's going to look at different plans. They're going to consider different floor plans. They're going to see if it fits on their property, or if they're trying to do an ADU or whatever. They're going to try and make sure it fits with the building and the rest of the site. But it could be, actually imagine for a second if you had a program like this and it didn't live in a three-ring binder or a network drive that you had to make sure was available, or you had to train new staff how to answer. These kinds of programs, they're simple enough to understand. You should be able to operate these honestly simply by giving people a website address to explain it, and they can go teach themselves how to use it. Let's talk a little bit more about what makes a good pre-approved building program. And this is how we'll wrap up. We'll talk about the best practices, because there are a lot of different ways to do pre-approved building programs. One of the most important things is portfolio selection and how a portfolio is curated. So here are a handful of buildings that were pre-approved in Bryan, Texas, which is a university city. There's between Bryan and its sister city, College Station, they're mashed together. There's Texas A&M in the middle. So there's 200,000 people in this little region. 70,000 of them are undergrad students. And we got brought in to look at alternatives to rent by the room student housing projects. They called these stealth dorms, 5-bedroom, 5-bath houses that were being built in their old neighborhoods. And one of the things that we needed to do was we needed to make a study of building plans that people already liked, and that's where this came from. And we use these slides to illustrate this principle of variations on a theme. This comes from one building, an old 19th century cottage that had been there for a while and everybody liked, and they told us to take pictures of. And then we see variations: a garage apartment, a cottage duplex, and a fancier version of a cottage duplex. And you can start to see that even though all of these are pre-approved, there's enough variety here that not all the buildings are going to look the same. And this is even before modifications to trim details, or to paint colors, or to eave returns, or things like that. Even if the plans are pre-approved, there's a lot there's a lot of opportunity to bring back this idea of new development being familiar to people who already live there. And we harp on that not because that has to be a rule, but because this standard is a pre-approval standard. And that's higher, that's less of a review than even a regular building permit review, or certainly than a variance or a conditional use permit. And so we need to make sure that people in the community, people who live there, and builders, that these sorts of plans are not just acceptable, but that it even gets people a little bit excited. And these kinds of variations can lead to something that is actually quite lovely, people actually appreciate and find charming. Here's a triplex that we did. This was meant to fit into single family houses, a neighborhood of single family houses, but to accommodate the same number of people as the stealth dorms were for the students. And that's what this does with the triplex. And we had people, we were so proud, and there's a punchline on this in a minute, but we were so proud that we had done this, that we had listened to people, that they knew we had listened to them, that they were coming up to us in town halls and saying, "Hey, we'd love to have this triplex in our neighborhood." We thought we had really done it. But a year later, after this program launched, we weren't seeing the kinds of volumes with permits that we were expecting, a handful of things here and there. And we went back to ask, and what we learned was that people love the floor plans. They love the styling on the exterior. They wanted to see it in their own neighborhoods. But when they considered what they wanted for their own needs, or if they're builders for a specific client, they needed significant changes to the floor plans to suit that one person, or to suit themselves. And there just wasn't enough variety in this pre-approved building program to accommodate it. In Bryan, Texas, they only had 6 plans that were pre-approved, and those were spread across 3 different building types. So the variety of floor plans was just not that big. We did a lot of research on this, and you really need to present, some level of choice. We recommend 8 to 10 floor plans per building type for people to feel that sense of satisfaction whenever they're choosing from a menu of pre-approved buildings. That might not surprise you if you reflect on your own experiences. Maybe the last major purchase you made, a car or a bicycle. Maybe it was like choosing a place to eat dinner when you were visiting somewhere for pleasure or for business. If there aren't very many choices, if there are only two or three choices, you just feel like you have to settle. It doesn't matter what it is. And conversely, if there are a lot of choices, a dozen or more, you start to feel like you can't make a decision, right? There are too many good decisions to choose from. So there's actually well-established psychology about what kinds of floor plans, how many floor plans should be included in a pre-approved building program to be most effective. Okay, now we just showed you a triplex. Look, most places aren't going to be able to pre-approve a triplex because even if you can pre-approve it, the building code is just going to discourage people from using it. So we talk about companion reforms. You have these opportunities with Housing Forward to learn more about how to prioritize and what zoning reforms should be prioritized. Well, beyond zoning reforms, there's still one major reform that's going to make a huge difference for all of those things, but also for pre-approved building programs. And if you have any opportunity, we're not going to spend a lot of time on this today, but we just published an article where you can learn more. If you have any opportunity to reform the thresholds for a building plan being permitted under the residential code versus the commercial code, that'll really open the door to having a pre-approved building program that does a lot for missing middle for missing middle building types like fourplexes and sixplexes and even higher. If you do have those kinds of reforms, or if you have a permissive state code, you can already do it. In Oklahoma, for example, these are some plans that are pre-approved for community in Oklahoma. There, if the building fits certain criteria, if there aren't too many units, then they don't require an architect's stamp. So it's still the commercial code, but it means you're free to pre-approve these because people are kind of free to find their own architect to finish the plans or to do the engineering for the plans afterwards. Every every building that's rendered in this image was pre-approved. This is going back to this principle of variations on a theme. And if you can have a variation on a theme, then it's actually a great placemaking strategy. It keeps everything from looking the same in a boring way and helps everything look similar in a way that's really charming and memorable. Okay, we're going to wrap up here. I just want to give you a few more case studies and try to help you understand the landscape of the different ways that you could implement a pre-approved building program. There are a lot of ways to do it, a lot of ways that are actually effective to do it, but some might be more effective for others depending on your goals. So in general, we think of two dimensions whenever we're classifying a pre-approved building program. The first is, where do the plans come from? Are they custom designed, or are they sourced from a catalog or from multiple catalogs from multiple architects? And there are pros and cons to doing it either way. When you source from a catalog, you get more plans for the same amount of money. And when you source from custom design, maybe you pay a little bit more per plan, but you know exactly what you're getting along the way. It takes a little longer to do a custom design portfolio because the design process is longer. It's shorter to adapt plans from a catalog. On the other hand, the other dimension is how the plans are made available to people who are using them. So if you've got a really tight budget, you can get a program done for a very little amount of effort, a very little amount of money, if you make the plans available at retail. If you're not going to sponsor the plans as a city, and we think you should, because that is one of the things that makes a program effective, it encourages people to use it. But if you got to get a program going, you can charge, not you yourselves, but you can pre-approve plans, and then people can buy those plans direct from the architects or from a plan clearinghouse. There are some great programs that work exactly like that. Check out the Seattle AD Universe, which is a program that works like that. And if you're especially interested in how to help ADUs, you got to learn more about the ADU Center in California. They started with a 2-county program area, and it's grown since then. What's remarkable about the ADU Center is the pre-approved building inventory that they have, the catalog that they communicate to people, that they show people, is just a collection of, it's just a list of plans that have been pre-approved that have already been approved in their jurisdictions. And they figure that because they've been approved once, that counts as pre-approved. And so they have an easy standard to meet. But they only work on their pre-approved building catalog 1 day a week. 3 days of the week, they help people, they educate, they concierge, they coach people who want to build ADUs. And that's really the secret for how the ADU Center has been so successful in helping literally hundreds of people a year in the California permitting environment get on the path to building ADUs. Here's a summary of the best practices. We think these are the things that will make a pre-approved building program work. Some of these are obvious. The top one's got to be obvious, right? I mean, we don't want to force people to use these plans. We're really trying to offer these as the most convenient option. And the idea is that if we have good plans and permitting is easy and the plans are inexpensive or even free, that becomes a reference standard. Instead of a minimum standard, it's a reference standard. And builders in the community, the hope is that builders in the community would look at the pre-approved building catalog and say, well, if I could do that for free, then I have to do better than that if I am going to sell somebody a plan that they have to pay for. The other thing is, look, this may be obvious or maybe it's not so obvious, but doing a program that covers the entire city has a lot more impact than doing a program over a special district. We've done programs both ways, and it's really just a numbers game. If you're trying to get dozens of permits or hundreds or even thousands of permits over a period of time coming out of a pre-approved building program, if your hopes are set high like that, you just won't be able to achieve those kinds of goals if you limit your pre-approved building program to a small area. So, hey, you might want to say, well, we're just doing a pilot. That's why it's a small area. But there are other ways to do a pilot. Maybe do a smaller number of plans, but still cast a wide net so you can get a lot of good feedback in your pilot. The last case study I want to tell you about, this is actually this is a picture from South Bend, Indiana. They have a pre-approved building program. They were helped by our colleagues at Opticos. Before they had a pre-approved building program underway, they were doing a calibration of their codes. And that started with the stress test. And I'm on the screen here presenting the results of the stress test. And we had all the planners from the city and the county, fire marshals, engineers come together and with paper dolls, literally, it's kindergarten craft area with actual glue sticks and safety scissors. They cut out building footprints. They put them to scale on real parcels in the city. And then they ran pro formas and they said, hey, where are our codes broken? What do we have to change in our codes to make these projects possible? And South Bend did this, Kalamazoo did this, Kalamazoo, Michigan did this process, Overland Park, you saw earlier, did this process. All three of those led to new pre-approved building programs after this, along with a host companion reforms. This is my last slide. This is so silly. This is my last slide. Y'all are East Coasters. I'm not an East Coaster. Maybe you are. Maybe you see blue fire trucks all the time. But whenever I gave a talk in Chapel Hill last year, look, this is my first time seeing a blue fire truck, and I said this was silly, but I was just struck by this idea that a bunch of people just sat around in a room, and for no other reason than they thought it was a good idea, they voted to make their fire trucks blue. And that's really all it comes down to for having good infill reforms, for having a great pre-approved building program is getting the right people in the room and supporting one another so that you can make that kind of decision. So I'm happy to be here, happy to answer any questions. Really excited to see what Kellie has to show us.
Thank you so much, Matthew. That was great. And it really gives us a clear picture of both the opportunity and the path forward. We're going to turn to Kellie now because Charlottesville has been doing some really interesting work in this space. And I think it will be valuable to hear what this looks like from inside of Virginia locality. So, Kellie, take it away. Let me go ahead and try and share your slides.
Thank you very much. And hello, everyone. It's nice to be here today. Hello to my former colleagues in Arlington. It's great to see so many of you in the webinar today. Please feel free to chime in if I misspeak on anything, obviously not from Charlottesville, but what I might reference from Arlington as well. So yes, I am the Director of Neighborhood Development Services in Charlottesville. I've been in this role for about a year and a half now. Prior to that, I was in Arlington County, so I do have two really relevant experiences here in Virginia in looking to find opportunities for infill housing development, of a smaller scale. Um, but today I'm going to talk a little bit about some work we've been doing in Charlottesville, coming out of the adoption of our development code in early 2024. The adoption of this development code in Charlottesville allowed for up to 4 units in most of our areas that had previously been zoned only for single unit development, but also some zones that allow for up to 6 and up to even 12. There are requirements for affordable units as well with those provisions, but a significant amount of additional density beyond what had been previously allowed. So this is kind of a summary of why we've been looking at these changes. The new development code opens the door to more diverse housing types, but we are still finding a number of barriers to actual production of these units. Um, I was just checking actually with one of my team members and confirmed what I thought was the case that despite having this new code in place now for almost 2 years, we have not seen actually any permits approved. So there's constraints both within the code, trying to achieve all of the requirements related to stormwater and utility access, providing a sufficient number of trees. But also, we are finding that there's a lack of knowledge within the development community and among homeowners, how to develop plans that meet these new expectations, these new opportunities for greater density. So we were approached. You can go ahead, Maria, and move to the next slide. We were approached last year by the University of Virginia School of Architecture, with whom we have a close partnership on a number of different studies and projects, to see if we would be interested in partnering with them on a design studio, where the focus would be on the potential creation of an open source housing design library it was specifically focused actually on accessory dwelling units. So we don't have accessory dwelling units actually specifically defined in our development code. We just refer to any housing on a lot as a unit. But what we thought would be most helpful as a starting point if we were to work with a group of students would be to see if we could develop some potentially pre-approved designs simply to add one additional unit to a lot. Let's start there, and maybe over time we could build our or increase our capacity and potentially explore some options for a design library for 2 units, 3 units, and so forth. So the studio, we agreed to partner with them, and they got a grant to start working on this design library. The scope of the project includes community engagement, really trying to work with the community to understand what they believe is most important for reinvestment in their properties. There has also been an interest in trying to integrate supportive landscape strategies, addressing stormwater concerns, integrating as much opportunity for landscaping. It has also been a goal. And ultimately, as Matthew indicated, creating more, making these design opportunities, these reinvestment opportunities more accessible to homeowners, or potentially even lowering barriers to home ownership. You can keep going there, Maria. So the first cycle in this partnership with the community has been focused on community workshops, working with our team to understand the development code. What are the parameters, the requirements? What are setbacks, height requirements, requirements for street-facing entry, and those sort of parameters. And they're also integrating study of potential health impacts in healthy design. And then in their second cycle, they will be looking to get public feedback. They will do some financial modeling to see what sort of costs would be associated with not only having a design that you could use, but actually, building it. And then ultimately a design library that could be made accessible to anybody who is looking to build an accessory dwelling on their property. Keep moving there. So the vision is really trying to specifically target opportunities in some of our more vulnerable neighborhoods, our sensitive communities, especially those that had historically been excluded from home ownership. Targeting engagement in those communities. And then hoping that this is an approach that could be scalable to the city more broadly, and we hope that the work that we're doing is something that could be applicable in other regions as well. And I think with that, yeah, happy to discuss, answer questions.
Yeah, thank you, Kelly. It's really helpful to hear about your program in Charlottesville, and obviously you bring a lot of perspectives from that area as well as Northern Virginia on this topic. So we're going to open it up now. We have about 10 minutes for questions. So if you have a question that you've been thinking about as you've been listening, feel free to drop it in Q&A or in the chat. I think we have one already coming in, but maybe I'll go ahead and start with my own questions while I let people ask some of theirs. Um, First question, for localities that want to pursue this type of program, where does zoning reform typically need to happen first? Like, what's the most common barrier? And Matthew, you sort of talked about some of this in your presentation, but maybe you could just kind of walk us through it quickly again.
Yeah, the number one thing would be to make sure that development can happen on smaller lots, or that you support the creation of smaller lots, and to really embrace that principle as much as possible. So level one would be to say, okay, we're gonna allow historically sized lots, in as many places as we can. Maybe in your community, your oldest neighborhoods have 50 feet wide lots, or maybe they have 30 feet wide lots. Whatever that historic standard is, try to apply that more broadly. Level two and beyond would be to say, okay, we don't care what size the lot is, as long as the fire code can be respected, we'll allow you to create it. And the reason we zero in on this idea of small parcels is because homeownership is one of the big motivators for communities to undertake these kinds of programs. And every time you change a rule or add a new opportunity that enhances your ability to make a small lot, every one of those small lots is a ownership opportunity in and of itself. So sometimes with just one rule change, you could literally double or quadruple the homeownership opportunities in your community.
Yeah, Kelly, did you want to add anything, or did he summarize it pretty well?
I think Matt summarized it pretty well. Yeah, I think trying to make sure that you have a clear understanding of what it is that your community is most interested in. What is most compatible with the existing community and meets their vision. And then yes, conducting study to confirm that what you want to build is truly feasible from the perspective of all the other requirements that you need to meet: fire, utilities, stormwater management, and then yeah, having a development code that allows for that sort of construction to actually occur.
Well, we had a question come in that Matthew answered, but I'm just going to go ahead and share it with everyone in case folks didn't see it. How does the intellectual property work on these pre-approved plans? Do cities own the copyright? And so both of you can answer. I know Matthew already took a stab at answering that.
Yeah, how's it work in Charlottesville?
Well, that's a good question. I guess we haven't really gotten that far yet. I would assume that these would be open source, so we wouldn't have any ownership over the designs that are produced. I mean, ultimately, it will be actually a product of the University of Virginia and the architectural school there. So we wouldn't have any ownership rights to it. And I do expect that while we're looking to, work closely with our building code official in the review of designs and, get his input, at ultimately, review for a building permit through his department, through his division will still be required as well.
Yeah, okay, that's interesting. I'll want to follow along with how you figure that out for yourselves. There are a few programs where the cities own the plans outright with some restrictions. But for the vast majority of programs, the architects retain the copyright and there's a sub-licensing model that is used. And the main reason for that is architects usually don't want to contribute a plan where it's so open-ended that somebody could download the plan, change a few things, and then say, it's my plan now. It's different enough, and I'm going to resell it or use it as much as I want.
Makes sense. All right, John Harbin has asked a question. Have you seen any permit-ready housing programs in historic districts?
So yeah, there have been a few. Usually, if you do a deep Google search, you might even find one or two that are specifically for historic districts. But by and large, programs that cover historic districts are doing it circumstantially because they're applying it to the entire city. And so the way that this is usually handled is design review for that historic district still applies, but it's conducted with field inspections. And to balance that, the portfolio is curated from the beginning with the historic district in mind, so that the portfolio, when it launches, is intended to be compatible with those particular districts.
I have one for Kelly. Are there any Virginia specific issues, challenges, or quirks? Virginia is unique in a lot of ways, especially compared maybe to some of the places Matthew's worked in more regularly, that you think communities should keep in mind when they're thinking about undergoing something like a permit ready program?
Well, I think Matthew already mentioned this, that the building code, is proving to be really one of the greatest, if not the greatest, kind of governor on, what we're truly seeing getting proposed. Requirements for sprinkler systems for commercial construction, which is really anything over 2 units. Requirements for staircases. I think North Carolina, for example, has recently made some changes to its building code to allow for single stair construction, which allows, now that's kind of moving out of these smaller scale housing types. But for apartments, the single stair approach, I think Virginia has just recently adopted some legislation that could get us closer to that, but really understanding the building code, I think, and what Virginia requires from a building code perspective is the most important
Yeah, that's definitely something that
consideration.
we should probably cover in more depth. But Jonathan did share in the chat some of our previous work on that subject matter, specifically single stair. So if any of you are interested in seeing about some of the work we've done on that topic before, it's linked there for you.
Okay, great.
Um, okay. Jason, if you are unmuted, you're more than welcome to share more about the City of Norfolk's program. That's actually one of the questions that I had. Are there localities in this room right now, perhaps actively thinking about this? If so, we'd love to connect you with resources. Um,
Yeah, the
other,
city of Norfolk in their Huntersville section has pre-approved plans. They do meet fire code and stuff, and the quality of the materials and stuff is spelled out pretty detailed. I think they have like 12 or 14 different elevations of the house plans, pretty much the same footprint to meet the setbacks and stuff, but they are pre-approved. You can go purchase the plans from the city with the permit, so it works pretty well.
Great. Thank you for sharing that local example today for folks who might be interested in seeing, what other localities are doing in Virginia. We have one more question about the design aspect. How does liability work for design professionals? This probably may be more for Matthew. If someone downloads the plan, even if a license is used, the architect may have no control on the quality of the build. Would they be on the hook for construction defects? I feel like you kind of tried to get at this point, but feel free to tackle that another way.
Yeah, so we use the word sub-licensing model. So when a plan is sub-licensed to an end user, they have to agree to certain things. And a lot of these terms and conditions that they need to agree to are the same kinds of clauses that you might see in a completely private sector or conventional contract between an architect and their client. They're mimicked in the sub-licensing model. And the short answer is uh, design professionals, even your own building officials, everybody is going to be on the hook for negligent acts. So if there's negligence in the review or there's negligence in the design, there's no liability protection. That's true of everything. But if it's something else, the user assumes all liability, including for construction defects. This is one of the big reasons why the International Residential Code instead of the International Building Code is so much more compatible with pre-approved building programs. Construction administration is not required with International Residential Code permits in most states. And more to the point, the plans are not legally complete whenever they're pre-approved at the time of download. And that's because the site plan is still required. The foundation design is still required. The utility layout, so on and so forth. Anything that is site specific and is still required to be a part of the permit is not completed at the time of download. It has to be completed by the applicant. So that includes in most programs, that includes things like fill in the blank wall sections where the builder looks at a pre-approved wall section and they have to fill in some blanks so that they enumerate what their practices, their construction practices and details are going to be with the crew that they use. And that's how the plans actually become completed. And that's the stage at which the user of the plan or the contractor takes on the liability. So just like a private sector project for building a house.
Great. Well, I don't think there are any more questions, and we're at 1 o'clock. So if anyone has last minute questions, feel free to type them in, or we can find a way to get your questions answered by Matthew and Kelly afterwards. But I have a couple pieces that I want to run through. So thank you, Matthew and Kelly, again for such a practical and grounded conversation. This is exactly the kind of discussion that we really wanted Zoned Out to kind of help promote and spark, connecting what's possible both at the state level, but then also how these real decisions can be made in localities every day. Before we wrap up, I want to point everybody that's joined the webinar today to the resource packet that I put together for today's session. You can find it in the link in the chat, and then I will also add it to our events page on our website. It includes a lot of the stuff that Matthew mentioned, and also the Charlottesville program, a little bit more information about it. It covers three main areas. First, the Virginia Zoning Atlas, an interactive tool, like I described at the start, that maps zoning conditions across the Commonwealth. Second, it has a primer on permit-ready housing. So all of you here today learned about it, but if you want to share this with someone who wasn't able to join, it goes over briefly what it is, how it works, and best practices that make these types of programs successful. And then thirdly, we have a table of model programs and case studies from jurisdictions around the country, including some of the ones that Matthew mentioned. I also want to call out specifically Matthew's Pattern Zone Co. software platform that several of these communities are using to host their permit-ready catalogs. So he walked us through one of them, but the information for you to kind of follow that and share that is also available in the packet. If you're interested as well in launching maybe a program regionally, like if you've had these kinds of conversations with partners in your region, Matthew and Pattern Zones Co. also offer a Greenlight group. It's a 1-year cohort model for up to 12 municipalities convened by a regional council, state agency, or advocacy organization. And so the convener sponsors a shared pattern book for a region to use, and each member jurisdiction comes out with pre-approved plan programs, a code reform roadmap, and GIS-enabled implementation tools. So those upfront costs of a plan design are kind of shared across the localities. It's a great program, and it's one that we'd love to spotlight and share more information about for those that are interested. Finally, if you want to build local awareness and momentum around zoning reform, which is a part of what we talked about today, please consider bringing a zoned out session to your community. We have some information about what those are and how you can do that as well in the resource packet. So everything there, that list, the platform links, case studies are meant to give you practical next steps, whether you're just starting to explore reform, or you're ready to launch a whole new program and you're ready to be one of the innovators in Virginia. So thank you so much for joining us today, and I'll end it on that. Thanks all.
Thank you.